It's often easy to overlook what we see every day, or at least regularly. Perhaps that's why we overlook our humble garden birds in favour of majestic eagles or mischievous ravens as our favourite birds. Yet the commonality of these small yet often noisy birds explains why there is a comparative wealth of folklore about them. Compared to other birds, there's a plethora to choose from. Death omens, cheeky tricksters in myth, and stars of nursery rhymes, these birds do it all. Now, I'm talking about the European varieties of these garden birds since I'm in Britain, and they're all relatively common in British gardens, so you've got more chance to see one if you're in this part of the world. But let's explore the folklore of blackbirds, sparrows, wrens and robins in this week's episode of Fabulous Folklore. Hello there and welcome to Fabulous Folklore, the podcast for all things folklore, occult and just a bit weird. I'm your host, Icy Sedgwick, blogger, fantasy author and your guide into these rather mysterious realms. I've got some rare things to show you, so come on in, take a look around, but be careful not to touch anything. These things sometimes bite. Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore with me, your host, Icy Sedgwick. We are continuing with Bird Month, and this week we're going to have a look at garden birds. So, massive difference from the red kites and falcons that we had a look at last week. And I think that the thing with these garden birds is because they're all relatively common, as I say, in British gardens at least, and obviously a lot of them are also found in Europe as well. I think you do then start to kind of get so used to seeing them that you almost overlook them in a way. Now, all of these are regular visitors to my garden in particular, but that's not why I picked them. I actually picked them just because of the sheer amount of folklore about them. I did have a bunch of other birds lined up for this episode as well, but then by the time I'd finished doing just the wren, I was like, do you know what? I could actually do an entire episode just about wrens. So obviously I have had to leave other birds out. Although, again, when I come back and do this theme again in the future, as I no doubt will, I can then have a look at them then. Now we're going to start off with the common blackbird, or Turdus merula, which is sometimes called the Eurasian blackbird, which is one of Britain's songbirds, and it's sometimes called the Eurasian blackbird just to differentiate it from the blackbirds that you get in North America. Now, you may be familiar with the tendency of blackbirds to just suddenly panic and give out this weird alarm call at dusk, even when there's no obvious reason like a cat around or anything. And a French tale actually offers a possible explanation in which the blackbird was originally white. Not quite sure what it was called at that point, but there we go. And a magpie told it where it could find a cavern full of treasure, but it needed to go and offer its services to the Prince of Riches before it could get near the gold. The blackbird found the cavern, but then just decided to skip the part where it met the Prince of Riches and just dove straight into the gold. And I've got a lovely mental image of like Scrooge McDuck style swimming through gold with that particular part of the story. Either way, a huge fire-breathing creature reared up out of the gold, obviously not very happy about it being there, and it chased the blackbird. The blackbird did escape, but not before its feathers were charred and turned black. So this supposedly explains both why the blackbird is the colour that it is, but also why it just suddenly panics for no apparent reason. And obviously, well, I mentioned the magpie there is an entire episode on magpies, because I think they're actually probably the one with the most amount of folklore associated with them, so there is a specific episode for magpies. And I've also talked about the practice of ornithomancy before, which is basically where young women, and it's always young women that get targeted in these, but obviously nowadays just anybody can do this. And you're supposed to pay attention to the first bird that you see on Valentine's Day. And this then dictates the career of your future partner. Now, there's whole lists of these available, and sometimes they contradict each other. But in this particular form of divination, blackbirds would indicate a clergyman, which I think is quite interesting. Now, despite this link with clergymen, blackbirds do actually enjoy a really ambivalent status within Christianity, because on one hand, St. Kevin of Glendalough apparently remained so still in prayer that birds would actually sit on his shoulders and hands while he was praying. And on one occasion, a blackbird apparently made a nest in his outstretched palm, and the saint actually remained still until the eggs hatched and the baby birds fledged. So that's a really lovely association between a saint and a blackbird. But there's another story, because of course there is. And by comparison, the devil apparently took the form of a blackbird when he tried to tempt St. Benedict. I'm not massively sure why a blackbird, because it doesn't really fit in with the rest of the folklore, but there we go. So the devil, as I say, now is a blackbird, flutters in front of the saint, and St. Benedict made the sign of the cross. But then as the blackbird left, having been driven away, St. Benedict was suddenly seized by licentious thoughts about a woman he'd seen. Realising it was the devil's influence, he then rolled in nettles and brambles to overcome his overwhelming desire for pleasure. As I say, not massively sure why that's associated with a blackbird, but an interesting idea when you then contrast that with St. Kevin's apparent love for blackbirds. Now, obviously, you're probably also familiar with the nursery rhyme Sing a Song of Sixpence, which involves 24 blackbirds being baked in a pie. And that always freaked me out as a child, but it does seem that apparently in the medieval era, they didn't actually bake the birds in the pie. The cooks would actually hide live birds under the pastry crust just before it was served at a banquet, and then the blackbirds would spring forth, surprising and apparently delighting the guests. Personally, I was probably actually quite confused by that, but there we go. Now, this particular nursery rhyme is as open to wild interpretations as any other, and I'm sure you've probably heard the episode where I bang on about Ring of Roses not being about the plague. And this one actually has a range of things about it, but the most common interpretation that I've seen is people try to insist it refers to the dissolution of the monasteries, with the blackbirds then representing monks. Now, there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence that it was around at the time. I actually double-checked to find out when sort of the sixpence came in and when the dissolution of the monasteries was, and there is actually a gap of about 10 years, but I don't know if we can really read anything into that. Now, the first verse of the nursery rhyme actually appeared in print in around about 1744, except it refers to naughty boys in the pie rather than blackbirds. So it's difficult to draw that link between the blackbirds and the clergyman if the first written version doesn't even involve the blackbirds, and they kind of appear in later versions. So it's basically highly unlikely that the rhyme has anything to do with Henry VIII at all. And we also talk a lot about apotropaic practices here on the podcast, but it seems that even blackbirds were believed to use them, which is fascinating, because at one stage people believed that blackbirds actually wove myrtle into their nests to ward off witchcraft. So I thought that was quite cool. I love blackbirds. There's one a couple of years ago used to sing outside my window right as I was recording, so you will hear on some of the older episodes this random burst of blackbird song in the middle of them. And they're fantastic mimics as well. And there's one in my estate actually likes to sing the A-Team theme tune. Where it heard it, I have no idea, but it is always quite funny to hear it. So I'm a big fan of blackbirds. I think they're really cheeky. Speaking of really cheeky birds, we're going to move on to house sparrows. And sparrows are an interesting bird because they almost eagerly moved into towns and cities alongside humans. And they do appear in different little bits of language as well. So in Wales, they're called the Adernator, or the bird of the roof. And in the Cockney dialect, you will find that somebody might refer to a long-standing male friend as the old cock sparrow. And tree sparrows are much rarer than the house sparrow, but house sparrows are actually doing quite well numbers-wise. Here in the northeast of England, they are known as spuggies, which you might remember if you ever watched Biker Grove, which was the Newcastle set teen TV show, and Spuggy was one of the characters. I'm not really sure why they're called spuggies, but it is actually quite difficult for me to remember to call them sparrows as a result. Now, despite their diminutive size, because they are really small, people actually caught them for food at one stage, and the birds were even sacred to Aphrodite thanks to their breeding capacity. And they're not particularly showy looking birds. I mean, obviously because they're prey birds, like they're small, they're brown, they've got little bits of grey on them. They're not like, say, goldfinches. But the fact that just because they breed a lot and they breed quite quickly, that making them sacred to Aphrodite really did make me smile. We had one in the house once, because a little baby one flew into the house because it was being chased by, I think it was a magpie, and it just flew in the kitchen door. And it actually must have been in the kitchen overnight, because I happened to open the door the next day and it just flew into the living room. And we managed to get her back out the window again, but I don't know who got the bigger fright, us or the sparrow, I'm not quite sure. But it was all fine, it was good. Now, sparrows also don't come out of Christian stories particularly well, and in one folk tale, different birds tried to lure the gods away from Jesus' hiding place in the Garden of Gethsemane. But the sparrows gave it away. And then swallows later pulled the nails from the cross, but then the sparrows brought them back. So the sparrows basically just keep getting things wrong in this one. It is actually worth noting that there are other stories in which the crossbill apparently tried to pull out the nails, and that's why when you look at a crossbill, it's so named because the top and bottom parts of its beak cross over, and this is where that apparently came from. Now, it is unclear what sparrows did to earn such a treacherous reputation, especially when they were also used in augury, which is the practice of divination using birds. And according to one legend, an augur saw 9 sparrows being eaten by a snake, and that became an omen that Troy wouldn't fall for 9 years. So I can't really see enough in the folklore that would explain why they would be so treacherous, but these things also get ascribed to other birds as well, so it doesn't always necessarily have to make sense because of the fact that lots of other birds get involved in these different tales. And we're going to move on to wrens, which is one of the ones that does get some of these associations. And I love the scientific name for the wren because it's just troglodytes, which I just think is a fascinating name. It's actually one of the most common birds in the British Isles, but because you generally don't see them very often, people think that they're quite rare, and they're just really good at hiding. They're very noisy as well when you do hear them, and I've got a pair that sometimes come and feed in my back garden, so I do actually get to see them quite a lot. Wrens were once subject, though, to the absolutely horrible practice of the wren hunt, sometimes at Christmas, sometimes other times of the year, and the practice predominantly occurred in Ireland, England, Wales and France, and there was only a single recorded instance in Scotland, although obviously it may have been more widespread and just wasn't recorded. Now, in some places the hunt took place during the festive period, like I said. In some places it fell on a specific day, so that might be St. Stephen's Day or December the 26th. It could also be Twelfth Night, or it might be later on Valentine's Day. Sometimes New Year's Day gets named as well. And gangs of boys would basically range around the local area, sort of hitting the hedges with sticks to drive the wrens out and then actually killing them, or at least killing one of them, not necessarily all of them, but they would kill one of them. Now, in France, the bird was hung on a pole and then paraded through town, and in parts of Wales, 4 men would carry the wren in a box supported by 4 poles. It is worth bearing in mind that in some of the Welsh ones, they actually captured the wren rather than killing it, so the wren's then sitting in a box, sometimes a cage, throughout the proceedings, probably not having any idea what's going on. And in these instances, women might then basically compete with each other to present the best ribbons to the wren. And despite this desire to kill the wren in certain places, a belief also persisted that you shouldn't steal from a wren's nest or you'd suffer ill health for the rest of your life, which is an interesting one. So why did people do this horrible thing? Well, one Irish explanation for the hunt was that a bird had woken St. Stephen's guards as he was trying to escape, and then therefore this was their punishment, so that kind of takes us back into the treachery of the sparrow. In other places, people blamed a wren for waking the Danes, so the Irish couldn't mount a surprise attack. The Danes might be swapped for Cromwell's forces or King William's army. It doesn't seem to matter what the combat actually was, but the wren was always blamed for alerting the enemy. And then some people also claimed that the wren gave away Jesus' hiding place, which is also ascribed to sparrows as well. So it just seems to be small, noisy birds end up getting all of these slanderous things thrown at them. Now, a slightly different explanation for the practice actually referred to Scottish New Year shooting customs, in which men and boys try to kill something before sunrise on New Year's Day to bring themselves good fortune in the coming year. Now, because the size of the kill didn't matter, you just basically needed to draw blood, the wren might have been a popular choice due to their numbers. On the Isle of Man, a legend actually claimed that a fairy had been luring the men of the island to an early death in the sea, and to escape persecution she had taken the form of a wren. And then when someone cast a spell on her, she was doomed to take that form every New Year's Day and to be killed by humans every year, sort of as like a penance for what she had been doing. Either way, the general prohibition on killing wrens throughout the year was actually suspended for this single day, because if you killed a wren in Wales at any other time of the year, it was believed to be an omen that your house would burn down. But the wren is also the cheeky start of an old fable which also involves an eagle, and I absolutely love this story because the birds were trying to decide who to crown as their king. And the eagle and the wren are both vying for the title. And you look at the size difference in them and think, well, that's fairly obvious which one should get the title. But anyway, to decide it once and for all, the two birds decided they were going to see who could fly the highest. So the eagle flies upwards in great wide circles and the wren just goes straight up. The wren obviously gets tired because it's smaller and then settles on the eagle's back, enjoying the ride high above the ground. Eventually the eagle also tired and then called out, asking the wren where he was because he couldn't see him. The wren then shouted back that he was above the eagle, and then the wren therefore won the match. Now, in some versions of the story, the eagle then attacks the wren, explaining the wren's stubby tail. In other versions, the wren gets disqualified, explaining why it never flies higher than a hawthorn now, because it's basically forbidden from doing so, because it basically cheated. But I do love that story because of this sort of sneaky, like, trickster element almost to the wren there, that it's like, well, you didn't say that I had to fly the highest the whole time. Which sort of finds a nice little loophole there. But it seems only right to end this episode with robins, which were often associated with wrens in folklore. And the story of the marriage of Cock Robin and Jenny Wren, told in verse form, perhaps helps prolong this association, particularly because people thought that wrens and robins were actually two birds of the same species and that one was the cock and one was the hen, when they're not the two different species. Now, I am referring to the European robin, or Erithacus rubecula. I hadn't really realised how different the American robin was until recently when I posted a video of a European robin on Instagram, so I am talking about the European robin here. Now, in the British Isles, the robin actually enjoyed a degree of respect and reverence from humans. So treating a robin badly invited disaster into your home. If you broke a robin's wing or leg, you'd likewise suffer a broken limb. And stealing their eggs in Wales actually left you open to punishment by witches or even the devil. Such was the prohibition against killing them that people believed anyone who did kill a robin would be betrayed by their hand, which wouldn't stop shaking. Now, we can find the prohibition against harming robins and wrens in a variety of sayings. So in Devon, it ran, "Kill a robin or a wren, never prosper, boy or man." Meanwhile, in Essex, it said, "The robin and the redbreast, the robin and the wren, if you take out of the nest, you'll never thrive again." So it's quite interesting that the robin has a lot of protections around it and so on, unlike other birds. Now, despite this apparent reverence for the robin, people in Rutland and Leicestershire actually considered it bad luck for a robin to enter the house. So in Suffolk, this was a death omen, while a robin singing at the door in Wales also heralded illness or death. Simply hearing robin song in Buckinghamshire was believed to foretell death, and elsewhere it foretold doom if an invalid heard robin song. And if a robin actually tapped on a person's window 3 times, it meant they would die. And according to one anecdote, a robin had indeed pecked at the window of T.E. Lawrence shortly before he died in 1935. There is also a link between robins and the dead via their apparent care for the deceased, which is weirdly sweet, because in the story of the babes in the wood, and I do have a bonus episode about that on Patreon, it is apparently a robin who finds the dead children and then covers their bodies with leaves in the woods. And this echoes an older belief that robins would actually cover the face of dead bodies with moss. In Brittany, people even believed that robins would sing laments near bodies until they were buried. And robins could also apparently predict the weather. So in East Anglia, robins singing in hedgerows predicted bad weather, while robins singing on a barn roof meant warm weather. And likewise in Northumberland, people thought birds singing from high trees also meant fine weather. And in Scotland, seeing a robin regularly in the autumn around your home foretold an early winter. Obviously, speaking of robins in winter, they're like the bird that you see on Christmas cards a lot of the time. And I think a large part of it is because of the fact that they're a bird that you see all year round because they don't migrate. But obviously with that nice red breast of theirs, I think they do stand out quite nicely, particularly on snowy scenes and so on. So ultimately, what do we make of the folklore of these garden birds? Well, these particular 4 that I've chosen are all year round residents of the British Isles, so they are quite a common sight in gardens and or parks. So if you don't have a garden, you might be able to see them in parks as well. And in the case of the robin, some commentators suggest their ubiquity actually explains the friendly relationship between the bird and the humans. They're so small, so it basically makes them pretty lousy as a meal for people, which spares them from the fate meted out to larger birds. They're actually quite bold, so if you're doing gardening work, they will sometimes come down and start rooting through the soil and things to see what you've dug up, because robins, I think they don't really fear humans in the same way that other birds do. Now, these birds appearing in Christian stories is perhaps a little bit more surprising because, like I said earlier, there's very little about sparrow behaviour which would explain their treachery towards Jesus other than them being noisy. But then you have robins finding kinship with St Kentigern, and then you've got the link between St Kevin and blackbirds, which suggests a holy fondness for birds similar to that of St Cuthbert and his eider ducks. Now, the use of these birds as omens is actually surprising given how common a sight they are, because to me an omen makes more sense if it's something that you'd notice because it's out of the ordinary. But I think the omens here is based less on their appearance and actually what they're doing. So because it's less likely that you would see a robin pecking on your window, you could see one every day for a year and not have that particular omen appear. So I think that's how they get around how common they are, because it's what they're doing. But because they're common, you'd also have a better chance of actually having the omen as well. Like, people would be able to recognise these birds. They are really funny little birds as well a lot of the time. And I think robins and blackbirds in particular have really, really distinctive song, whereas sparrows just sound like they're yelling at each other, which I always find quite funny. But I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really like all 4 of these birds, and I hope that if you get the chance to see them, as I say, if you're in Europe, obviously these are the birds that I'm talking about. The American versions do have their own folklore, but obviously that's something that was kind of beyond the scope of this particular episode. Next week, we're going to have a look at more ornamental birds. So I know I'm doing peacocks. I haven't decided on the other ones yet, but I will obviously have a look and decide what I can come up with for that one. And then our final episode of August will be mythical birds. So the martlet and the phoenix are currently on my list, but obviously again, I'll have a look and see if there's anything else that will be worth covering as well. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. I hope that you're well, and I'll see you next week. Cheerio. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, so if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee, or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.